Autumn in Seattle always came with a crisp chill that made the air taste faintly of rain and fallen leaves, a scent that mingled perfectly with the quiet solitude of my life. I had spent years building stability brick by brick, my career in architecture, the sleek lines of my modern apartment overlooking a skyline that glittered softly in the twilight. My life was defined by clean edges, predictable patterns, and a careful emotional distance I had maintained to shield myself from the pain of unmet dreams. For a long time, I'd grieved silently over the emptiness left by relationships that faded like twilight, each leaving scars deeper than the last. The deepest wound had come with the news that I'd never bear children, a final door slammed shut by a cold medical pronouncement. I had mourned alone, but in time, accepted that some dreams were not meant for me. Yet, the universe had its own way of challenging the walls I'd so carefully built. One quiet evening, as I strolled through the aisles of the local Walmart, picking out vegetables under fluorescent lights that hummed gently overhead, my path crossed Aaron's. He was barely 20, a quiet young man with gentle eyes and a demeanor that spoke of worlds contained within him. Each time I saw him, I felt drawn to the quiet stillness he carried, as if he held an unspoken understanding of life's fragility and beauty. Our conversations began as casual exchanges, but soon, without my noticing, deepened into long discussions about life, dreams, and fears. There was a comfort in his presence, an ease I'd never found in any relationship before. Unlike others, Aaron never pushed, never judged. He listened, really listened, with eyes that held no judgment, only quiet acceptance. One rainy afternoon, standing near the checkout, my fingers brushed against his by accident, a fleeting touch that sent an unexpected warmth through me. My heart fluttered at the innocence of the gesture, the lingering warmth where our skin had touched. I looked up to meet his gaze, and in that moment, something passed between us, a silent understanding, tender and profound. That evening, as we stood by my car in the rain, I hesitated, feeling vulnerable for the first time in years. Aaron stepped closer, his hand lightly brushing mine, an almost imperceptible touch. My breath caught, and suddenly the world around us faded, the patter of rain, the murmur of distant traffic. Everything seemed to hold its breath as his fingers gently entwined with mine. His eyes were soft, questioning, as if seeking permission. Without thinking, I squeezed his hand gently, feeling the silent, affectionate reassurance pass between us. In that brief moment, I felt a part of me long buried begin to stir, a whisper of hope, tender, cautious, yet impossible to ignore. Aaron's quiet strength, his youthful kindness, had unexpectedly cracked the shell I'd built around my heart, leaving me both terrified and deeply comforted by the fragile bond forming between us. As I drove home that night, the rain tracing quiet paths down my windshield, I touched my hand to my lips, recalling the gentleness of his gaze, the warmth of his touch. For the first time in many years, the idea of letting someone into my carefully guarded world didn't scare me. It felt like the beginning of something beautiful, delicate and uncertain, but undeniably real. With Aaron, life took on a gentler rhythm, one that felt like a quiet sanctuary from the expectations that had always weighed heavily on my shoulders. The world around us was loud. Men I had known often spoke of marriage and children, of futures they envisioned in terms I could no longer share. But Aaron never asked for more than I was ready to give. Instead, he offered something I hadn't realized I desperately needed: acceptance, in its purest, simplest form. Our friendship deepened slowly, tenderly, each encounter layered with small gestures that spoke louder than words ever could. Aaron noticed things no one else did, like how my favorite coffee was always made with a hint of cinnamon, or the way my eyes lingered sadly on children playing in the park. He never commented, but would gently squeeze my hand, a silent reassurance that he understood, that he was there. Each touch, light and unassuming, warmed a part of me that had long felt frozen. Months passed, seasons shifted, and yet, in Aaron's presence, time felt suspended. We spent countless evenings in my apartment, talking softly over steaming mugs of tea or wandering Seattle's streets, lights glowing softly in the dusk. While his peers chased fleeting pleasures, Aaron chose quiet nights, deep conversations, and moments steeped in meaningful silence. He was constant, steadfast, and always there, a comforting presence woven seamlessly into the fabric of my life. One chilly spring evening, as rain drizzled gently against my window, I sat curled on my sofa, a worn quilt draped around my shoulders. Aaron sat beside me, his quiet warmth radiating softly, grounding me. My heart ached at the unfairness of it all, that someone so young, so full of quiet wisdom, chose to spend his evenings with a woman whose life was tangled with unfulfilled dreams and quiet regrets. Without realizing it, my eyes filled with tears, the weight of unspoken gratitude mixing with the pain of knowing I could never give him what others might. I turned away, embarrassed, but Aaron gently reached out, his fingers lightly brushing away a stray tear from my cheek. His touch was delicate, almost reverent, as if afraid he might break me. Yet, in that softness, I felt a strength that anchored me. He shifted closer, wrapping his arm gently around my shoulders. I leaned into him, my head resting against his chest, soothed by the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel vulnerable, safe in the cocoon of his quiet affection. Aaron pressed a soft, lingering kiss to my forehead, a gesture so tender it sent warmth cascading through my veins, melting the last traces of my carefully maintained distance. In that moment, I knew our connection had become more than friendship, yet less defined than romance. It was something fragile, beautiful, and uniquely ours. As his fingers intertwined with mine, I realized that love, in its deepest sense, wasn't always about grand gestures or sweeping declarations. Sometimes it was found in quiet moments, in gentle touches, in the understanding gaze of someone who knew your scars yet chose to stay anyway. As I closed my eyes, feeling his soft breath against my hair, I silently thanked whatever force had brought Aaron into my life. For the first time in what felt like forever, the ache of loneliness lifted, replaced by a quiet, blooming hope that perhaps, with Aaron by my side, life could still hold gentle, unexpected joys. It began quietly, a dull ache behind my eyes that I ignored, attributing it to long hours at work or sleepless nights spent wrestling with unspoken emotions. But as days turned to weeks, the pain deepened, sharpening into relentless migraines that blurred my vision and left me feeling weak, vulnerable, and strangely fragile. The walls of stability I had built around my life started to tremble, each headache cracking the careful facade I had so carefully maintained. When the doctor spoke the words, Stage 3 brain cancer, the ground beneath me shifted as though reality itself had splintered. I sat numbly in the sterile hospital room, unable to absorb the weight of the diagnosis, my heart clenching with a fear that threatened to swallow me whole. The woman I had been, strong, self-reliant, felt like a distant memory, replaced by someone whose body had suddenly become a battleground. Aaron was there, sitting beside me in the silence that followed, his face pale, eyes clouded with worry. He didn't speak, but his presence was enough. His fingers, ever gentle, reached for mine, clasping them tightly, an anchor in a sea of overwhelming uncertainty. I leaned into him, my body trembling, unable to suppress the tears that fell silently down my cheeks. His other hand brushed softly through my hair, his touch tender and reassuring, a silent promise that I wouldn't have to face this alone. In the weeks that followed, chemotherapy took its toll, stripping away parts of me I had always considered defining. My hair, once thick and dark, fell in clumps, leaving me exposed in ways I had never imagined. My strength drained with each treatment, leaving me exhausted, weak, and utterly dependent, a state I'd spent my entire life resisting. Yet, amidst the chaos, Aaron was my constant. He never flinched, never faltered. He sat beside me during every grueling session, a silent, unyielding presence, offering his warmth when the cold hospital air became unbearable. One afternoon, during a particularly rough day of treatment, nausea washed over me in relentless waves. Aaron held me gently, murmuring softly as I trembled in his arms, his fingers tracing slow circles on my back, grounding me in his touch. When the worst had passed, he carefully tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear, an instinctive gesture of affection that had survived the chaos of my changing body. His touch lingered, delicate and tender, a silent affirmation that despite everything, I was still me in his eyes. As evening settled into darkness, I lay in bed, frail and shivering, feeling more vulnerable than ever. Aaron sat by my side, his eyes soft with unspoken emotion. He reached out, taking my hand in his, pressing it gently to his chest. The rhythm of his heart, steady and reassuring, echoed through my fingertips, reminding me of the quiet strength that had always defined him. With quiet reverence, he leaned forward, placing a gentle, lingering kiss on my forehead. It was a gesture filled with love, sorrow, and a depth of understanding that words could never capture. I closed my eyes, allowing the warmth of his touch to seep into my bones. In that moment, I realized that this diagnosis, this cruel twist of fate, had stripped away my illusions of control, leaving only the raw, unfiltered connection Aaron and I shared. He was my refuge, my quiet strength in the storm. And though my future was uncertain, the bond between us felt more real, more profound than anything I had known before. In his embrace, I found the courage to keep fighting, not just for myself, but for the precious, unexpected love that had blossomed quietly between us. The aftermath of my latest treatment left me hollow, like a shell tossed by unforgiving waves, stripped of energy and resolve. The cozy familiarity of my apartment provided little comfort tonight, and even wrapped in my favorite blanket, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. Outside, the world carried on, indifferent to my struggle, but inside, everything felt fragile, suspended between hope and despair. Aaron sat quietly beside me, his presence an unwavering comfort. He gently took my hand, his fingers tracing slow, soothing circles on my skin. Each stroke was delicate, intentional, an unspoken attempt to ease the weight of my pain. In the silence that stretched between us, I sensed something had shifted, a quiet urgency, a tenderness deeper than before. It was as though he was holding back words, wrestling with thoughts too heavy to voice. I turned slightly to face him, studying his profile in the dim light. His youthful features had sharpened with the burdens he carried, his eyes holding depths of sorrow I wished I could erase. My heart tightened, a fierce sadness gripping me. I feared I might never see the fullness of the man he was becoming, that fate might rob me of witnessing the life he still had ahead. The thought was a knife's edge of pain, almost unbearable. His thumb paused on the back of my hand, and he lifted his gaze to meet mine. His eyes shimmered softly, emotions swirling beneath the surface. Without words, he conveyed so much, the worry, the affection, and something deeper, something aching with longing. He moved closer, his touch feather-light as he brushed a stray tear from my cheek. "You don't always have to be strong," he murmured softly, his voice trembling slightly. "Not with me." My heart twisted at his words, feeling the walls I'd worked so hard to maintain crumble. I swallowed hard, fighting back the surge of emotion that threatened to overwhelm me. For once, I allowed myself to show vulnerability, leaning into his touch as if it could shelter me from the storm inside. He slowly shifted, drawing me into a gentle embrace. I rested my head against his chest, soothed by the steady rhythm of his heart, the warmth of his body a balm against my frayed nerves. His hand moved gently up my back, drawing small, comforting patterns through the thin fabric of my sweater. It was an intimacy that went beyond the physical. It was trust, vulnerability, and something precious that had quietly grown between us. His voice was soft when he spoke again, the words barely a whisper, as though he was afraid the truth might shatter the fragile bond we'd built. "I worry because I care about you," he admitted, his breath warm against my hair. I closed my eyes, soaking in the sincerity of his words. "I know," I whispered, the admission barely audible, but it carried the weight of everything unspoken between us. For a long while, we remained that way, locked in a quiet embrace that said more than words ever could. Each heartbeat, each breath was a silent exchange of understanding, of longing, and an acknowledgement of how intertwined our lives had become. As the night deepened, Aaron gently eased me back against the couch, carefully wrapping the blanket around my shoulders. His hands lingered, tenderly smoothing the fabric, his touch full of quiet devotion. With a softness that made my breath catch, he leaned forward, placing a lingering, affectionate kiss on my forehead, a gesture full of the love neither of us had dared name, yet both of us felt deeply. As he settled beside me again, I laid my head gently against his shoulder, feeling safer and more cherished than ever before. For tonight, at least, the uncertainty of tomorrow faded away, replaced by the certainty of his presence, the most beautiful truth of all. Aaron seemed determined to bring light into the shadows that had settled over me, suggesting a weekend escape as a quiet reprieve from the weight of treatments and the ever-present ache of uncertainty. Initially, I hesitated, wary of burdening him further. Yet, there was such earnestness in his eyes, such tender hope, that my resistance melted away, replaced by quiet gratitude. The morning we left, Seattle's skies were cloaked in gray, rain softly tapping against the windows as Aaron carefully packed a borrowed trailer with everything he thought I might need. My favorite teas, warm blankets, the books I'd loved but hadn't touched in months. Watching him move with quiet determination, my heart swelled with an affection so deep it frightened me. He wasn't merely preparing for a trip. He was pouring love into each gesture, each thoughtful detail. When we finally reached our campsite nestled deep within lush, towering woods, I teased him gently about being overly prepared, noting the stacks of blankets and abundant snacks he'd meticulously arranged. He looked at me then, his eyes soft and steady, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "That's impossible," he said simply. "You're the most important person in my life." His words lingered, warm and profound, settling gently into my heart. They were spoken so naturally, without pretense or expectation, making my breath catch at their sincerity. I reached for his hand, squeezing it softly, letting my touch convey what words could not. The smile that blossomed on his face was worth 1,000 quiet confessions. As evening fell, Aaron built a small, crackling fire, its warm glow flickering against the surrounding darkness. We sat close, shoulders touching, wrapped in a thick quilt, breathing in the crisp, earthy air. The forest around us whispered gently, each rustling leaf a soothing melody. Aaron carefully poured me a cup of tea, his fingers brushing softly against mine in the process, lingering just a moment longer than necessary, sending a gentle warmth through me. I leaned against him, comforted by the steady rise and fall of his chest, the soft beating of his heart beneath my cheek. Aaron wrapped an arm around my shoulders, pulling me gently closer, his touch protective and filled with quiet devotion. With his other hand, he gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear, his fingertips lingering tenderly against my skin. For a long while, we remained that way, lost in the simple intimacy of the moment. No words were needed. Everything important was spoken through quiet gestures, shared breaths, and the warmth radiating between us. He pressed a gentle, lingering kiss to the top of my head, a gesture full of love, reassurance, and an unspoken promise that he'd be there, always, no matter what. As the fire slowly dimmed and stars emerged, painting the night sky with gentle brilliance, I realized that this simple weekend, this quiet escape, had become far more than just a reprieve from the hardships of my illness. It had become a sacred space where love, quiet yet powerful, had taken root, blooming beautifully between us. In Aaron's embrace, under the endless sky, I felt something I had once believed impossible: hope, fragile yet undeniably present. With each gentle touch, each lingering glance, Aaron reminded me that life, no matter how uncertain, could still hold moments of profound, gentle beauty, and that even amidst pain, love could grow quietly and bravely, defying everything else. After breakfast, the forest beckoned us with its quiet serenity, sunlight filtering through the canopy of leaves, painting the path ahead in dappled gold. The crisp air carried a gentle chill, yet warmth radiated from Aaron as we wandered deeper into the woods, side by side. The quiet between us held a new kind of tension, soft, unspoken, yet powerful. Aaron's hand brushed against mine every so often, each fleeting touch sending warmth spiraling through me. Without thinking, I looped my arm gently through his, feeling him instinctively pull me closer, his touch grounding me in a profound sense of belonging. Every now and then, I felt his gaze rest on me, tender yet searching, as if he were silently asking questions he feared the answers to. My heart tightened, and I leaned my head softly against his shoulder, answering the unspoken question with quiet reassurance. Aaron paused, turning to face me, his eyes soft with concern. "You okay?" he murmured, his voice tender, careful, as though he feared even these gentle words might break the fragile bond between us. I nodded slowly, my throat tight with emotions too complex to name. Unable to voice what I felt, I reached out, cupping his cheek gently in my palm, my thumb brushing softly across his skin. His eyes searched mine, full of a yearning that matched my own. Slowly, he leaned in, pressing his forehead gently to mine, our breaths mingling in the quiet stillness of the forest. His fingers found mine, intertwining softly, and I felt a gentle tremor pass between us, charged with unspoken truths. With quiet reverence, he tilted my face upward, his lips brushing tenderly, hesitantly, against mine, a kiss that held the quiet promise of more. When we parted, he pressed a lingering, affectionate kiss to my forehead, holding me tightly, as if I might disappear if he let go. The warmth of his embrace filled me with a quiet certainty. Whatever lay ahead, we had found something precious, something that felt, at last, undeniably real. We returned to the trailer only to find that fate had other plans. The battery had died, leaving us stranded in the quiet stillness of the woods. My heart sank with anxiety, but Aaron remained calm, his presence a steady anchor amidst the uncertainty. He simply turned to me, his gaze soft but determined, his voice a quiet promise. "We'll be okay. There's a hotel we passed earlier. It's not far." As we began the walk, Aaron's hand never left mine, holding me gently yet firmly, as if silently assuring me that he wouldn't let anything harm me. His quiet confidence soothed the worry gnawing at my chest, and soon I found myself leaning into him, taking comfort in the steady warmth of his touch. We reached the hotel as dusk settled around us, casting a gentle golden hue across the small, rustic building. Aaron handled everything, checking us in, finding dinner, making sure I had extra pillows and blankets. His quiet attentiveness was touching, each small gesture a testament to his care and affection. Watching him move with such gentle certainty, my heart ached with gratitude and something deeper, more profound. After dinner, we sat quietly in the small hotel room, a soft tension growing between us. My gaze drifted to Aaron, who sat on the edge of the bed, lost in thought. I reached for his hand, gently intertwining my fingers with his. My voice was quiet, tender, barely above a whisper. "How do you always know what to do?" Aaron looked at me, his eyes soft, full of warmth. He lifted my hand gently to his lips, pressing a lingering, affectionate kiss against my fingertips. "I just do," he murmured quietly, his words filled with quiet certainty. He shifted closer, gently wrapping his arms around me, pulling me into a comforting embrace. I rested my head against his shoulder, closing my eyes, savoring the steady beat of his heart, the warmth of his touch. Gently, he brushed his lips against my forehead, a soft kiss full of tenderness and unspoken love. In the quiet of the evening, with Aaron's arms securely around me, I realized that sometimes the most profound moments weren't planned. They were found in simple gestures, in quiet devotion, and in love so gentle it needed no words. As evening deepened, an unspoken tension lingered between us, heavier now, charged with a quiet sense of anticipation. We sat together in the small hotel room, soft lamplight casting gentle shadows on the walls. Aaron's gaze drifted toward me, his expression thoughtful yet vulnerable, as though he was on the edge of voicing something long held inside. He hesitated, his eyes meeting mine, a quiet turmoil brewing beneath the surface. "I think about the night we met a lot," he finally admitted softly, his voice trembling slightly, raw with honesty. "How everything changed after that." My heart tightened, and instinctively I reached for his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze, silently encouraging him to continue. My voice trembled softly as I confessed, "You've been the best thing that's ever happened to me, Aaron." A deep emotion flickered in his eyes, his fingers tightening gently around mine. "You don't understand," he whispered, his voice husky with vulnerability. "Then tell me," I urged softly, my gaze searching his face, my heart pounding with anticipation and quiet hope. Slowly, gently, he leaned forward, closing the distance between us. His lips brushed mine softly, tenderly, uncertainly, before deepening into a kiss filled with quiet intensity and unspoken longing. In that moment, everything else faded away, leaving only Aaron and me, our hearts speaking truths that words never could. When we finally pulled apart, his eyes searched my face, fear and hope mingling in his gaze. He started, then stopped, unsure of how to continue. But the silence that followed was no longer uncertain. It was filled with the quiet understanding that we had crossed an invisible threshold, stepping into something beautifully profound, yet terrifyingly new. I didn't speak, couldn't speak, overwhelmed by the tenderness of the moment. Yet I reached up, gently cupping his cheek, letting my touch convey everything my heart felt. Slowly, Aaron leaned in again, resting his forehead against mine, his breath warm and trembling against my skin. In that quiet hotel room, in the embrace of someone whose love had quietly transformed my life, I realized this was no longer just friendship. It was love, deep, unexpected, and undeniably real. Whatever uncertainties lay ahead, we would face them together, guided by the quiet strength of a bond that had blossomed gently, beautifully, in the quiet spaces between us. This was not the end. It was a beginning, a promise whispered in the quiet, that love, however unexpected, was ours to embrace.